Hallo, Cymara Hashiv is Misha Andrew Grant McCunich agus Hamiolaki Yak 3 na Gaeltacht. I'm Andrew Grant Mackenzie and I am the Highlands historian. So I'd like to welcome you to this video which is all about the Battle of Alderne. So this year in 2021 it's the 376th anniversary of the battle itself on the 9th of May. And I'm very pleased to be working alongside the 1645 Inn and the new owners who took over in 2019, who are very interested in connecting with the history of the site and also of the village of Alderne as well. And this battle is a key part of that, clearly, and that's where they got the name for the inn, the 1645. It was formerly known as the Covenanters Inn as well, but as we know, in battles there is often more than two sides, but there was the Covenanters and the Royalists, and so the 1645 is a reminder of that key date in the village's history as well. So what I'd like to do is explain a little bit about the tactics of the battle, the development towards and within the battle, and also the geography and how it fits in around Alderne. The Battle of Alderne is possibly one of the most overlooked battles in Highland history, but certainly in Covenanter history. In printed histories of the Covenanter period, it's often a footnote, and it's not looked at in as much detail as battles like Inverlochy, for example, and Philiphoch as well. So yeah, I think this battle really needs a lot more attention. If not only for the fact that the mapping of Historic Environment Scotland features only the end of the battle. There was an awful lot more went on to get to that final point. And so that's what we're going to be looking at today. But first, we're going to start with a little bit of music. So, as well as talking about the Battle of Alderne and how the battle developed, I'm also going to be speaking in this video a little bit about the pibroch that was written possibly at the time of the battle. It's widely believed to have been written by somebody who was perhaps in the battle, or knew people that were in the battle. And it's very interesting because it's very difficult to prove that, of course, and we're probably never going to know exactly who wrote this tune and when they wrote it. But the way in which this tune develops, it really does describe the Battle of Alderne, the tactics of it, and how it developed, and hopefully that will become clear throughout this video. But the reason I want to start by talking about the pibroch is because we're very lucky to have a recording of my piping tutor, Andrew McLennan, who has recorded for me the urla, or the ground of the tune, as well as the crún luath and the crún luath amach. And the crún luath amach appears in setting number 2 of the tune, but not setting number 1. And it's very interesting to have a pibroch that has 2 settings, but both settings of this tune both develop in a very similar way, and could be easily a primary source record explaining the development of the battle. And that is a remarkable thing to think. You really have to understand the music and to understand the messages within the music to hear that. And hopefully I'll explain that for you today. But this counteract of setting number 1 of the tune is the way in which bagpipe music would have been passed on for centuries, possibly from the 1300s, almost definitely from the 1400s, but you know, without doubt from the 1500s, 1600s, and into the 1700s when it was first written down in 1780. Musical notation for the bagpipes didn't really start until 1760. And so it's relatively recent in bagpipe music. Now, we can't blame it or the Pibroch Society for this, because their recording of the notation of music in the 1900s has really saved many of these tunes from disappearing altogether. But unfortunately, when you put Pibroch into notation, it does take away elements that can only really be understood through the counteract. Now, the words used in this counteract aren't actually Gaelic words, but they are descriptive words of the movements to play on the bagpipes. But they have within them and within the feeling of the tune messages that can be passed on. And this is something that I've spoken about in the past and in past posts, and it's something that's of great interest to me to find out more about. So what we have in the editorial notes here is that this tune is to be found in the Campbell Counteract and in the MSS of Angus and John Mackay. Now, the Campbell Counteract is the counteract that was written down in 1780 and first published in the 1780s. Now, this was written by Colin Campbell, who was the son of Donald Campbell. Now, Donald Campbell, Peebuth Moor Macaglasric, the great piper, son of the vegetables, was apparently Charles Edward Stuart's preferred piper in the Jacobite army of 1745 to 1746. So this connection to these great pipers and the connection between these pipers is very important. Angus Mackay was, of course, Queen Victoria's piper, and John Mackay was his father, both from Rassay as well. So we have recordings of Andrew playing from setting number 2, which is widely accepted to be the better setting. But what we have here is from setting number 1, the counteract, and this will probably be completely wrong, but I'll try and give you an idea of how these tunes would be passed on. So if I was to sing Hierin, Odro, Ha, Odro, Hiodin. That's the first part of the first line. Well, that's the first 2 bars, if you like, of the counteract. And it's very similar actually to setting number 2 as well. So there it is in notation. That singing would at one time have been understood by almost every piper as to how that was to then be played, but it also gives you a sense of the tune. It gives you a sense of the feel of the tune and what's to be passed on through the message within it. So we'll now have a listen to Andrew McLennan playing the ground of the tune, and we'll talk about the early stages of the development towards the battle that I think the ground of this tune is really representing. So here we are at Alderne, but before we get back here, I want to explain a bit about the development towards the Battle of Alderne. So we'll start in February 1645, and that's when the Royalists and the Covenanters fight the Battle of Inverlochy, which is just north of Fort William. But during this battle, there is a huge number of Mackenzies further up the Great Glen who are coming to join the Covenanter army. And it's after this battle that these Mackenzies head back into the west, and the Royalists and the Covenanters head up to the northeast of Scotland. This is very important because it's a key recruiting ground for actually both armies. And they end up in Aberdeen, and this is where the Covenanters under Sir John Hurry successfully put Aberdeen, the Royalist-held Aberdeen, under siege. In April 1645, Montrose effectively gets his own back for John Hurry's Covenanter siege of Aberdeen when he storms Dundee. Both armies are in Dundee at that point, and unfortunately for Montrose, after storming the town, he's then chased away by Hurry and the Covenanters. But it's only short-lived, because the Royalists then start to chase, effectively, the Covenanters across to the west. The Covenanters' reason for moving in this direction is because they need to bolster their army. They need to find more support. They need to effectively get their strongest allies involved. And so they end up in the area of Morayshire and the Moray Firth. And if we look at this part of the map, we can see why. Because here is a flat area of ground south of the sea, the Moray Firth, and north of the mountains, the Cairngorms. And so this is the perfect through route
It was probably used in Pictish times by armies. It was certainly used in 1745 to 1746 by both the Hanoverian and the Jacobite army as well, in the prelude to, of course, the Battle of Culloden, which is right in this area. And so here in 1645, 101 years earlier, you have effectively a similar thing happening. You have the Covenanters coming across and reaching Alderne. When they reach Alderne, they decide to keep going and they reach Corder. And it's at this point they meet a small group of Mackenzies. But when they set off for Alderne, their expectation is to go to Inverness and to hopefully meet a much, much larger force of Mackenzies with neighbouring clans and supporting clans such as the MacLennans and the MacRaes and the Mathesons. That's because this clan, basically their clan territory goes from Kintail all the way up to approximately where Fraser territory is near Bewley, onto the Black Isle, around via Dingwall, and then up towards Ullapool. You've also got, well, Ullapool's a much later place, it wasn't around at the time, but Coigach and just south of Loch Inver. It then comes down to the Gaelloch Mackenzies and the Applecross Mackenzies and back to the Kintail Mackenzies. So this is a huge, huge clan territory, coast to coast. And so this is the clan that the Covenanters are hoping will come out in force to support them, along with some Gordons from up in the Fern, Tane and Dornoch area. And so we return to the area surrounding Alderne and Corder. When the Covenanters reach Corder, they meet some Seaforths with MacLennans and also MacRaes, and they start to come back to the east. But at this point, the Royalists have already encamped around Alderne. And this is very, very important, because this might be the part that the Pibroch, the ground of the Pibroch, is trying to explain. We don't know which side the person who wrote that Pibroch was on. We also don't know if they were actually involved in the battle or not. It's very, very difficult to ever imagine proving that. But there are two distinct build-ups happening at the same time. What we have is the Royalists setting up camp on the 8th of May, 1645, and you have Montrose with cavalry in the Kinstery area, just south and east of the village. MacCulloch is sent into the village and sends some outlooks up the road towards Corder, knowing that that's the direction in which the Covenanters went. They then take up billets within the village itself, which was much smaller than it is now, and that's in this area where the mouse is pointing at the moment. But Montrose isn't finished there, and this is the thing. This is why the Historic Environment Scotland map doesn't show the whole picture of the battle, because Montrose, southeast of the village, sends cavalry up behind the school towards the middle of Alderne.
We can see here the view that Montrose's men would have had from looking from Gallows Hill and turning round to the left. We're looking directly towards Alderne and the school.
Also has cavalry possibly encamped around Gallows Hill. That's a prominent site to this day, but also onto the hill of, between Inshoch and Broombank farms. And at this point you have quite a good viewpoint down into the village, which we'll see later in this video. He also has cavalry and Irishmen at Drumduan farm, and so we can see if we zoom out that he has basically his quickest troops based right around the village, at quite a distance, actually. And that almost proved problematic to Montrose as the battle began. But it also creates the perfect opportunity for a pincer movement into Garlick Hill. And that becomes prominent in the closing stages of the battle. We also have, of course, the Covenanters coming back from Corder. And so when they reach Corder and they meet Mackenzies, MacLennans, MacRaes and possibly Mathesons as well, they start to come east. and we'll take up the drive and have a listen to Andrew McLennan playing the ground, or the Urla, of the Pibroch as they approach the village of Alderne. On the morning of the 9th of May, as the Covenanters were approaching this position, the rain had been coming down basically all night and it was torrential. And so somewhere near this area, and we're coming up now to the turn off to the left to Canudi Farm, at this point the Covenanters clear their muskets. As they move to the left of the road here, towards Gallows Hill, through where Canudi Farm is now, the levies that MacCulloch had placed up this road make their way very quickly back to the village and alert MacCulloch and the Irishmen who are billeted within the town. It's unclear how much Montrose knew about what was happening at this stage of the battle, but it's now that he brings his cavalry up from potentially Gallows Hill and also from the Constery area, just behind where the school is now in Alderne. He then splits them to the north and the south, and alongside the men at Bogside of Brodie, Bogside of Both, and also at Drumdewen Farm to the north of what the A96 now runs through, they basically set themselves up ready for a pincer movement. On the left of the road here, as we drive in to Alderne, you can see the Gallows Hill. That is the key feature, and where the road meets this crossroads is where the killing ground on the way up to the Castle Hill ahead of us there basically ends up at the end of the battle. Here we're turning into the car park of the 1645 Inn, which of course is an absolutely great place to start a tour from. So I would recommend the 1645 Inn as a base for a tour for the Battle of Alderne. We're now at Gallows Hill on Broombank Farm, to the east of the village of Alderne, and we're now looking southwards towards the position of Montrose at Constery over in the distance there. This direction is now towards the village of Alderne, where his cavalry were sent and broke to the left and right. As with all Highland battle sites, there's now a housing development, or modern housing development, on part of it. Obviously the village of Alderne was already here at the time of the battle, but this housing development is called Montrose Woods because it's close to where Montrose was. Coming away from Gallows Hill at Broombank and coming across the fields at the top between Broombank and Inshock, you can see down to Drumdewen Farm, which is where some of the Gordons on the Royalist side, rather than the Gordons on the Covenanter side, were stationed with cavalry. And looking across to both house, it's almost certain that troops would have come through this position on their way into the battle. You can just see the Ducat there in the distance, which is atop Castle Hill, where the heat of the fighting at the end of the battle took place. So we're now beyond both house and the Ducat on the western edge of Alderne, facing towards Nairn and moving round to the left back towards Alderne. We're now looking towards the farmland of Canudi, which is where the Covenanters started to develop into battle order and started to move forward towards the darker green hill just coming into view now, which is Garlick Hill. We can now see where MacCulloch was based, just in the distance there, in the village of Alderne. Coming back into the village of Alderne itself, this is where MacCulloch, the MacDonalds and the Irishmen were positioned on the night of the 8th of May into the morning of the 9th. And they were incredibly brave during the opening stages of the battle, because when the Covenanter army approached this green hill, Garlick Hill, they went out to fight them and then retreated to draw them back into the village. At the point that MacCulloch moves forward towards the crest of Garlick Hill, the Covenanter army is coming at him in full force. And it's a much larger army because of the approximately 3,000 to 4,000 Mackenzies of Seaforth that have joined. He's just got 2 small battalions, and this must be considered a very daring and extremely brave strategy, which eventually brought the rest of Montrose's army time to basically assemble from all of those outlying places up at Drumdewen, over at Gallows Hill, and also down at Kinstery. So MacCulloch and his 2 battalions are in this area, and they're fighting desperately. MacCulloch is then forced back by Campbell of Lawyer's regiment, which includes Irish veterans who knew an awful lot about how to fight against the tactics of MacCulloch, and the 2 troops of Covenanter cavalry under Major Drummond, who are in this area approximately here. At this point of the battle, Montrose is probably out of sight of MacCulloch in this area near Kinstery. And as he's moving around and building his army together from the outlying camps, he brings his cavalry up towards Alderne. Gordon of Moneymore's royalists are then embedded on Castle Hill, and this becomes a central feature of the rest of the battle. MacCulloch, who has been forced back into the town, is given a bit of breathing space when Campbell of Lawyers decides to check his advance to avoid being outflanked. This allows MacCulloch to take up new positions in the western houses of the town, probably about here in today's map of the village. The target for Hurry and his troops who are still on Garlick Hill becomes Castle Hill, which is where the both Ducat is now. The castle of Alderne was an ancient royal castle, and Alderne is a royal borough. The Ducat was built in possibly the 1680s or the 1690s, and at the time of the battle there was no real evidence of the castle in sight, so there was no real defences or anything like that to be used in the battle. Certainly none are mentioned in any of the records of the battle.
But looking around, we can see why it was such a prominent position and why it was so important that Gordon took this position for the Royalists. Looking back towards the positions throughout Alderne, this is looking towards where the church is, and also beyond there where Montrose was. We're now looking basically across the A96 towards Gallows Hill and Broombank. And now coming around, we'll begin to see the polytunnels, which are just outside Both House, which of course wasn't there at the time. There may have been some structure there at the time. The walled garden perhaps was there at the time, but the current Both House was built much later. Certainly in this area and Bogside of Both, there were some of Montrose's troops as well. So they would have come in from this area across where the modern A96 is now. Moving further to the left, we're now looking towards Drumdewen Farm, just in the distance beyond the trees there. And that, of course, is where a large amount of Irishmen and also cavalry were stationed by Montrose as well. So that's a very important tactical point. And looking around as we come left, this is the geography, the terrain that those horses would have been coming over towards the Covenanter army, which would have just been coming into view now. The yellow hill is Garlick Hill in this video, and we can now clearly see the view with Garlick Hill and also Canudi Farm. And this is where the Covenanter army of approximately 3,500 to 4,000 men were amassing towards this central point of the Castle Hill. Looking just to the left, we can now see the western flank of the village of Alderne, where of course MacColla had been fighting desperately for the majority of this battle. It is completely clear when looking from this point how important it was for Hurry to take this position, if at all possible.
His army rams forward in this area. Remember, the 1645 pub is here, and I believe that this action probably takes place in this area and this area. This is a huge army, so we have to remember this is an awful lot of men ramming into that hill, probably in the region of 3,000 to 4,000 men in total. This becomes the killing ground. And this is where the modern roads into Alderne, from Corda and from Nairn meet. As the attack by Hurry bogs down, MacColla's higher positions become absolutely key. And as the Gordons on Castle Hill hold strong, MacColla attempts a counterattack towards Garlick Hill in this direction, but were also bogged down. As Hurry attacks back, MacColla manages to retire back into the village to regroup, and it's probably at this stage that MacColla is seen by Montrose, who is still in this area of the village. Having formed up to the east of Alderne, Montrose, seeing his men falling back into the village, then is able to outflank Hurry on both sides very quickly and simultaneously. At this point of the battle, one of the most questionable actions takes place. Major Drummond, in charge of the Covenanter cavalry, orders his men to turn left from this point into this area, rather than right to take on the cavalry of the Royalists coming in from this area. This turn left means that he also runs over his own infantry. Major Drummond was then court-martialed after the battle and was killed. As the Royalist cavalry on the left and the right flanks start to charge in in a huge pincer movement. They crush into the Covenanter infantry on Garlick Hill and Castle Hill, and Campbell of Lawyer's brigade are broken and pursued as far as Brightmoney Bray in this area. As Garlick Hill was stormed, Hurry's army began to break and flee. The last remaining Covenanter combatants are thought to have been Seaforth's regiment. The Mackenzie standard had been planted with the caboufet, the stag's antlers, into the ground, and they fought a fierce defence alongside Matheson's, Macrae's and Maclennan's. As the Royalist forces tore into their flesh, Ruairi Maclennan of Maclennan lost his life protecting that standard, along with his men, and Captain Bernard Mackenzie, with men from Chanonry and the Ross estates. They were all slain before the standard was captured. Hurry remained and watched this before leaving the field himself. It's anyone's guess where that happened between Garlick Hill and Castle Hill, but it must have been somewhere in the region of the road. In total, many more than 1,000 Covenanters were killed, and only a small number of Royalists were killed. Such was the effectiveness of the Royalist cavalry manoeuvres. Many of the Covenanter dead were buried in Dead Man's Wood, which is here. A number were also buried in the kirkyard at Alderne. This was an utterly crushing defeat for Hurry and the Covenanters. We're now going to listen to Andrew Maclennan playing the Crunluath and Crunluath Amach from the Battle of Alderne, the Pibroch, setting number 2, which I believe really describes the closing stages of the battle. So as we return from the killing fields of the Battle of Alderne to the 1645 Inn, it's a good time to start to think about the future. I'd like to thank the 1645 Inn for taking such an interest in remembering the anniversary of the Battle of Alderne. But what about the battle site itself? Well, as has been proven at Culloden just this year, something like a LiDAR scan could tell us an awful lot about this battle site and also help our ongoing research into the battle tremendously. The positioning of cavalry by Montrose and the work of MacCollar in the early stages of the battle, and also the approach of the Covenanters, could be unpicked dramatically through LiDAR technology. So I hope that something like that is possible for Alderne too. So I hope that this video has given you a brief insight into the history of the Battle of Alderne, but also the geography of the tactics of the battle as well. It certainly shouldn't be underplayed as it is in history. This is an incredibly important battle where Highlanders were fighting Highlanders, and it really was the culmination of the Gallic interest in the Covenanter period. And so that for me is worthy of research in itself. I also hope it's highlighted the importance of the musical culture of the Gaeltacht as well, with the pibroch of this tune, of this battle. So that for me is something that I hope that I'll do many, many more years research on as well. I'd also like to thank the owners of the 1645 Inn for showing such interest in the history of this battle as well, and also in commemorating the event for the 376th anniversary and hopefully in many years to come as well. So all that's left for me to say is that if you do want a tour of the battle site at Alderne, I would be more than happy to take you around. Please go to highlandhistorian.com or email andrew@highlandhistorian.com to book a tour. Thank you very much. The recording of the Urla, or the ground, that you can now hear is my own rendition, recorded in May 2020. The movements I am playing far too slowly, and if you compare it to the way Andrew played it earlier in this video, I've got a long way to go. But I hope you'll enjoy this rendition and this attempt at the ground to finish this video.